Hi, this is Frank Radice for Red Touch Media, and this is our continuing series on the future of content, and I'm here with Kevin Conroy, who is the president of digital for Univision. Kevin, tell me a little bit about the digital process, what goes on at Univision in terms of digital.
So it's all driven by one really central belief, and that is that the thing that's most important for us is to make sure that our content of high quality, branded, Univision content experience is available to our audience everywhere that they may want to enjoy it, consume it. And so that really is the driver for us. So our view is that if we can present our content and make our content an option for our audience across any device, any platform, they'll have the opportunity to choose us. By definition, if you don't make your content available, the audience doesn't have the opportunity to choose you. So with that in mind, we really took a very different look at things. Unlike other networks that have simply taken their linear value proposition and extended it to digital and essentially created a digital property or experience for any one of their individual networks, we took a step back and said, this is an opportunity to do something different. So we created something called Uvideos, which we launched about a year ago, which is the first fully bilingual digital video network that offers a selection of content from across all our networks in one experience that's available on the traditional web, the mobile web, and as an application both for handheld devices, tablets, consoles. So Uvideos is really everywhere. And importantly, it is a bilingual offering. So the user gets to decide what language they want to consume the content in. And building on that, we then said, well, if that approach makes some sense for video, to create more scale around a digital video offering, why don't we think about doing the same thing for audio? So we created a product called Euphoria, which is for audio, essentially what Uvideos is for video. So all of our radio stations are streamed live through Euphoria, in addition to custom channels and a wide selection of songs for people to be able to personalize. So those are really the anchors of the different types of media offerings, and then we have some point products in addition to those.
So the research has shown that the Hispanic audience over-indexes very strongly in the use of digital devices. Do you play to that strength, or is it something that doesn't even matter? It's just you've got to be in the space.
Yeah, no, it matters a lot. I mean, I think it's fair to say at this point now that we're into 2014. It's hard to talk to anybody that doesn't talk about the importance of video and mobile. And I think if you're not focused on those two things, then you're really lagging the market. The difference is we've been focused on those two things for a while, and the intersection of video and mobile is really in the sweet spot of what our audience is all about. So unlike the general market, which really in the US really lagged with respect to mobile penetration, and as I'm sure most people know, Europe and Asia and parts of Latin America were well ahead of the United States with respect to mobile adoption. Our audience, meaning Hispanics in the United States, have actually been behaving and living their lives connected to mobile in a way that was more similar to Latin America, Asia, and Europe ahead of the general market. And so because our audience was already using a variety of mobile devices, as the market started to move to mobile, it actually moved to them. Right? And so it really plays a very central role. I mean, people talk about mobile first. We are mobile first. So as we think about products, as we think about how we build and iterate and develop our product roadmap, we start with mobile, and then we actually have the other forms of our product, other form factors follow mobile.
It's interesting because it almost sounds like what has been discussed here at this event as second screen is really primary screen.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of terms that get thrown out: first screen, second screen, third screen. I think the thing that's most important is to realize that people are consuming in different ways, even during the different times of the day. I think entirely too much of the conversation has been made out to be solely generational, as if older generations consume one way and younger generations consume a different way. I would say it differently. I would say that perhaps older generations or older demographics, maybe they consume in a more narrow way, and maybe younger people consume in a broader way. Maybe their aperture is a little wider, but there's no question that there's a range of experiences, and I think that really starts to lead into a whole discussion of social. And I think what's important there is people talk about social as if it's one thing, and I would argue that social is at least two things, maybe more, right? There's a bit of social which has to do with how you connect with people within your network around the content that interests you most, that may or may not be exactly directly connected to what you're watching. But then there's this other thing called social TV, which is very much connected to what it is that you're experiencing on a particular screen, right? And so the first screen, second screen, even third screen experiences, I think have far more to do with a directly connected viewing experience and what you can or might want to do to augment that viewing experience, whereas social media is really how you go about amplifying a connection that you have with other people around a shared interest, which may be content.
Well, and in any one of those examples, we're still talking about that the content creates the context which generates a conversation, is in essence, and that works for social as well as traditional television. I think, to me, what I find interesting about the Univision proposition is you're such a big media company. You have broadcast television, you have cable television, you have radio, you have a tremendous digital platform in Uvideos, you have everything that you're about ready to do with authentication and television everywhere. All of these things makes for probably, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the biggest media companies in the world, and traditional television-wise, you guys had a magnificent February.
We did, and I think I appreciate you pointing that out, because the reality is that Univision is a unique company. I mean, it's a company with a very proud, and I think is deservedly so, proud history of innovation. It started more than 50 years ago with a single station in San Antonio. Today it represents 14 networks, 62 owned or operated television stations, 69 owned or operated radio stations, plus a big and expanding digital footprint. So we really have evolved to become a true multimedia company. We also have some really unique advantages, I think, as a media company, because unlike some others, our brand really means something to our audience. There is a very significant connection between our audience and our brand and what our brand represents, and an affinity with the kinds of content and experiences that our audience has come to expect. And that has in turn, I think, helped to fuel the creation of a really powerful culture at Univision that's it's a mission. I mean, and it feels like a mission, because everyone's very focused on serving the audience and everything that serving the audience means. It's not just about creating a viewing experience, it's about creating a connection. And I think one of the coolest things about what's happened with technology is that a lot of the innovations have actually made it even more possible for us to be able to create these kinds of connections that we aspire to create, both with existing audiences and also new audiences.
Well, and that brings to mind, of course, the new bilingual audiences that you're gathering from Fusion or from El Rey.
Yeah, well, and also, interestingly, within our core offering, because we've been experiencing on digital now for several years, a percentage of our audience on digital has actually been enjoying engaging with us in English, albeit always culturally relevant, always through the lens of what's appropriate and culturally relevant for Hispanics. But we saw, I'll use the example of 2010, Copa Mundial, the World Cup. We noticed for the first time when we integrated social media functionality, Facebook and other features into the media playback experience, a lot of the comments and the commentary and the way people were exchanging, thoughts and passion around the games was in English. And so it really, at the end of the day, what it says to us is our job is to create and deliver a compelling experience, make it as easy and accessible as we can across all the different ways that people want to consume, and most importantly, choice wins. Giving the audience, giving the user the ability to choose their experience, to decide how it is that they want to consume, whether it be active, passive, sharing, not, those are choices that really should be made at the user level. I think our job is to make sure that those choices are available to them to be able to make those decisions.
So what's the secret sauce to take all of these concepts and integrate them with sales?
Well, I think it's really understanding where's the value, right? And I think at the end of the day, our job, I think, is to establish the right kind of balance and bridge and relationship between engaging audiences and delivering value to marketers who want to reach those audiences. And I think we're pretty good at that, and I think that we're getting better as it relates to how you go about packaging different forms of media. And I think as an industry, as a company, I think the industry's come a long way in bridging and packaging what has been traditional linear media with newer forms of digital media. I think there's still some work in progress around things like social. So for example, people do kind of typically want to think of social as all one thing. And I do think it's different things, both for the reasons I mentioned earlier, the difference between social media and social television, but it's also different through the lens of how you think about social relative to what the content offering is and how you define what is content. Is a tweet a content? Is a post content, etc. That's one piece of it. Social as a way of engaging audiences and the importance of engagement as a metric beyond in addition to reach and frequency, and then ultimately your point about monetization. And I think with social, I think we're at a point where I think it helps to amplify, I think it helps to deepen and enrich the experience. I actually think it's a mistake to try to think about how to package and sell social on a standalone basis. I think social is a piece of the puzzle. I don't think it's the puzzle.
I also think it's interesting to consider social as one of those tools that can help you in the C3 argument or the C7 argument, that you can, beyond the day of air, so that it can be a tool that can help to be used as a marketing tool or a promotional tool.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think today the value is mostly, I mean, we need to be careful, right? Because it's never black and white, or rarely black and white. I think most of the value is around the content experience and the ways in which you can engage and enrich and extend the audience. I do think there's monetary value, to be fair, but I just think that monetary value should be derived by packaging it as a part of something, not something that's standalone. And the subject of measurement, which is an important one to touch on, I think measurement has really been kind of a big hurdle in this process over the course of the last 10 years, because in many ways, I think the expectations for social, for not just social but digital in general, have been very high, and the great promise of being able to reach people in a more efficient, effective way. But the only way to prove all of that out is the ability to measure.
Yeah.
And I think the digital industry did itself, frankly, a little bit of a disservice more than 10 years ago in its initial, kind of come to market. It set itself up almost against other platforms, and I candidly think that was a mistake. I think at the end of the day, this should be about, and I think it is about, total audience, the ability to engage across a variety of different platforms and devices, and ultimately realize that what you're trying to do at the end of the day is delight someone in a content experience that's really interesting to them and something that they hopefully want to share with other people, right? And so the only way to get a full picture of that is to actually look at the full picture, and I think some of the measurement stuff that we've been dealing with for 10 years has not been helpful, because it's kind of grown up in pockets. It's really hard to put it all together, and ultimately I believe that the value of digital is in its accretive benefit, how it adds to the whole and how it expands sort of the value of media, not the idea of pushing value from one place to the other, because it's not about one platform or the other. It's about the audience.
I think it's pretty clear that digital, as it was sold originally, was not the holy grail, and it wasn't going to be the one thing that was going to take over from the other. It's not the Jeff Zucker dollars against analog dollars against digital pennies. But I do think that there's an argument to be made that digital can be utilized as a tool to gather data by giving content for that data, then you get those numbers that then you can aggregate and figure out what is the story behind that.
And as long as that's done with full transparency, I think there's no problem at all. I think we've learned, really learned, and in many times the hard way, that the audiences that have engaged and really are really sort of rich in a digital context are audiences that are used, this point that I made earlier about choice. They're audiences that have grown up and are used to being able to make choices about where they want to go, what they want to do, how they want to consume, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a lot of the debate around data gathering, data sharing is because of practices that were not transparent. And I think sometimes it's oversimplified in should it be opt-in, should it be opt-out? What can people do with data, et cetera? I think if you start with the lens that it's about transparency, if you give the user the ability to choose what it is that they're willing to share and on what basis, I think we'd be having a very different conversation.
And of course, in the end, it's really about the user being able to enjoy content.
That's it. It's the industry. It looks complicated because it is, and there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle that are somewhat challenging for people to understand, particularly in a world of monetization where all of a sudden you hear people talking about native premium experiences and programmatic and what does that really mean, and private exchanges. There's a lot of language that's frankly a lot challenging for a lot of people to really understand what's going on. The goal is really simple, however, right? The goal is, at the end of the day, it's all about content. It always has been, it always will be. Yes, content and distribution are inextricably linked, and they together are how people go about accessing and enjoying. But if you're not making great content, compelling content, high quality content, then there's not a lot more to talk about. If you are, well then there's the starting point for something that I think is frankly pretty exciting, because I think over the arc of now 10, 15 years, I think it's pretty cool that people can now access and enjoy content that they're passionate about in so many new ways. And we're seeing that by, evidenced by just how many more people are at the table consuming content. Right now we need to sort through the balance of a lot of business issues, measurement issues, et cetera, to make sure that the economy and the ecosystem thrives, because only if we have a successful, robust economy around digital will it continue to evolve, I think, in a very exciting way.
Fantastic conversation. Thank you. That's Kevin Conroy, the president of Digital for Univision. This is Frank Radice. See you next time.